Hey guys, Joan Ribs here with another SpireChat chat. Today I want to talk about the Ironclad card Anger. Deal 4 damage, place a copy of this card into your discard pile. This is not like the most insane, incredible card in the world at all, but I think it's an interesting one to analyze, so I'm going to try to do a good job of that. I think that it's very easy to see what this card does like the first time you draw it, which is it deals 4 damage plus however much strength you have, plus if they're vulnerable it's another 2, or yeah, it deals damage for 0 energy, right? Cool, it's pretty straightforward. And it's pretty easy to see what the card does in its like theoretical best, coolest possible state. Like you have Shuriken and Kunai, you have a spinning top, and your entire deck is just Anger, and all you ever do is play Anger, and it kills everything on turn 1. And that's cool and everything, but in order to actually evaluate the card, we want to probably think about what it does, you know, in a normal fight. And I think a lot of people overlook Anger entirely, because it's a little bit difficult to conceptualize what it does in a regular fight, and what it does doesn't seem like it would be that strong. But there are times when it definitely is strong, and I want to talk about what those are. So at the start of the game, Ironclad is more energy consumptive at the start of the game than Silent is. Ironclad has a bash, which costs 2, right? And 4 defense, 5 strikes. So your average card cost is like 1.1 or something like that, whatever. Silent, meanwhile, has no 2-cost card in the starter deck and has a neutralize. So Silent cards cost a lot less. And because of that, at the start of a game, Silent typically doesn't have to worry too much about being able to play all the cards that they draw. You don't get to play like 1 defend or 1 strike or something, but it's probably a pretty bad card anyway. And then of course on Ascension you have a curse in your deck as well. So the first time through your deck you're going to draw 1 card that you can't play at all. So on average you'll only need 3 or 4 energy probably to play the cards in your hand. And you start with 3, so you're getting, you know, a decent amount out of that. Ironclad does not have that luxury. Ironclad starts with a bash and 9 cards which cost 1. And so Ironclad with the starter deck is never getting a hand where they can play all of their cards. And sometimes if bash is in your hand, you're only getting to play 2 cards out of 5, which is quite inefficient. If you think about cards drawn as a resource and energy created as a resource, you want to be spending both of those resources pretty well. And Ironclad's a lot better at spending energy than he is at spending cards drawn at the start of the game. Silent has lots of ways to stay low energy. There are cards like Deflect and Slice. Backstab is a pretty solid uncommon. And then there are even energy generating cards like Concentrate. Endless Agony is another excellent uncommon that lets you play the cards that you're drawing, even though you only have 3 energy in Act 1. For Ironclad, though, that's really not so true. If you look through these cards, Reckless Charge is okay value. I think this card's alright, but it's really iffy, and you know, the fact that it costs 0 doesn't even mean that you want to play it every time you draw it. Sometimes the gaining 1 vulnerable on yourself is more of a setback than the 9 damage is a benefit. Intimidate is it's okay. I definitely don't think it's incredible, especially you have to keep in mind that if something's already weak, then applying weak to it again doesn't do anything, and one of the strongest Iron Wave cards is Shockwave, which applies 3 weak to everything. So there are going to be, if you have Intimidates in your deck, there are going to be plenty of times when you get a Shockwave, you play the Shockwave, it's a Shockwave plus, you've got 5 weak on enemies, and they're just weak for the entire fight, and your Intimidate is actually just a dead card. Other than that, like, Offering costs 0, but that draws you more cards. Battle Trance also costs 0, but again, that draws you more cards. Dropkick is sort of a free card, but that draws another card. So Ironclad has much more abundant ways to get more cards than Ironclad has ways to use the cards that they're drawing. Pretty much the only ways to utilize more cards than you have energy for in Ironclad are Seeing Red. Seeing Red gets you energy just for one turn and exhausts itself. Rage, which costs 0 and gets you block for attacks that you play. Bloodletting gets you energy and loses you HP. Havoc, when upgraded, lets you play the top card of your library, and so this takes the top card of your library and plays it, and at a 0 cost for one of your card draws, because you had to draw Havoc to do so. Clash, sort of, if you can get rid of all of the non-attacks in your hand. Difficult when you have a curse in your deck for the entire run on Ascension 11+, and also difficult if you have to deal with status effects at all, or if you want to load your deck with skills. And Anger. And out of all of these cards, I actually think that Anger is like the most consistently obviously valuable. I guess we can say Body Slam Plus also costs 0, and Havoc Plus costs 0. These ones require upgrades. You're not going to see those cards upgraded already on Ascension 15 very often, because upgraded cards show up less than on lower difficulties. I didn't even mention Flex. That's because I think Flex is terrible. Alright, so I want to try to, like, classify these cards. Try to break down why I think Anger is actually one of these stronger cards for you. Cards like Flex and Seeing Red and Bloodletting, these are cards which sort of assume that the cards in your hand are already providing the value that you want out of the turn. Flex is assuming that you already have cards which deal damage in your hand, and if you don't have great cards that deal damage in your hand, Flex is a pretty bad card to draw. Again, Bloodletting and Seeing Red, these are cards which assume that the cards you've already drawn in your hand are particularly valuable for you to play. These cards do not do anything of their own accord. And Rage is somewhat similar. Rage assumes that you have a bunch of attacks in your hand. A lot of these cards just have a very combo-ish nature entailed to them. You have to not only draw them along with the right number of cards that you want to play, but you need the cards that you draw them with to be the right sorts of cards. The same is true for Clash. If you draw Clash and Barricade in the same hand, you're not going to be playing Clash that turn. If you draw Clash and a Burn in the same hand, you're not going to be playing Clash that turn, etc. What Anger brings to the deck is it just very reliably deals 4 damage. It brings consistency to the deck. There is very rarely in this game a turn where dealing 4 damage, that you like dealing an extra 4 damage, is not going to be valuable. There are lots of cool interactions that Anger has with other things, so relics like Kunai and Shuriken, which care how many attacks you play. Where's Fan? Is that silent only? No, Ornamental Fan as well. Can get you extra block with Ornamental Fan. The really big thing that Anger scales well with, though, is strength scaling in Ironclad. Ironclad has all sorts of strength scaling. Something like Inflame is very good, gain 2 strength. Something like Spot Weakness, I'll typically be taking over most other things in the start of the game. Gains you a bunch of strength. Demon Form gains you a ton of strength. Limit Break gains you a ton of strength. And if your damage as the fight goes on is coming predominantly from your strength, like say you have 30 strength or whatever, like Anger does not deal meaningfully less damage than something like Strike or something like Clothesline, even something like Perfected Strike. Like if you're getting up to 30 strength, Anger is a ton of damage. So this card gets drawn, and you don't need anything else to be going on at all. It just very reliably can deal 4 damage for you if you want to play it. And when you play it, you place a copy of it in your discard pile. So now you have 2 Angers in your discard pile, where before you only had 1. For most fights, that doesn't matter at all. Like, for most hallway fights, if you have a 25 to 35 card Ironclad deck, which is a very reasonable number of cards to have in an Ironclad deck, you're just probably not really getting through your deck that many times. So it doesn't really matter that you have, a deck that's starting to bloat up with anger. It can actually work to your advantage, though, in longer fights anyway. Because, like we just said, the more strength you have, the more value you're actually getting out of an attack like Anger, which just costs 0 to deal a ton of damage. If you think about a turn where you draw Whirlwind, for example, and you have 20 strength, Whirlwind deals 25 damage to all enemies 4 times or whatever, because you use 4 energy on it. If you have an Anger in your turn, you've got another 24 damage that turn. Boom. Cool. Ironclad typically doesn't struggle that much to sink their energy into something every turn, in my experience. And so having an Anger on the side as well is really nice. And again, I want to reiterate, I think cards like Flex, cards like Bloodletting, cards like Seeing Red, I think these cards are considerably less valuable than Anger because they're less consistent. They require the other cards in your hand to be doing something specifically valuable for you at this time. Imagine a turn where you draw 5 Seeing Reds. Deals 20 less damage than a turn where you draw 5 Angers. Okay, that was maybe a shitty example, but whatever. The other thing, though, is that Anger is a card which is good at the start of the game. It's actually pretty good. Compare it to Slice on Silent, just a solid common. Anger is going to consistently output extra damage for you. It's pretty good against Lagavulin and Gremlin Knob. Like, I would rather have an Anger in my deck against those fights than not have an Anger in my deck against those fights. And it's decent against the 3 Sentinels as well. And the more strength scaling you get, the more excited you are to have 1 copy of this card in your deck. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to have tons of Angers in your deck. You don't have to have an Anger in your deck at all. But having 1 Anger in your deck can be really nice and can help smooth out the start of the game, and if you get a lot of strength scaling going, can actually be very valuable later on in the game as well. And yeah, I just wanted to say that, because I think a lot of people overlook Anger. There are people who see Clash and see that this deals 10 more damage, but honestly, I think Anger is a better card than Clash. Just because Anger is so much more reliably playable, and because I'm expecting my Ironclad decks to typically either become very bloated with skills and powers, if I have some sort of defensive setup where I'm generating a ton of block, in which case Clash is very difficult to play, or I'm expecting them to get a lot of strength scaling, in which case the difference between Anger and Clash becomes less significant. Dealing 4 damage is a lot less than dealing 10 damage, yeah, but dealing 34 damage isn't that much less than dealing 44 damage. At this point, the numbers are starting to seem a lot closer than before. So yeah, that's my spiel about Anger. I mean, I might talk more about the other 0-cost cards than I did today, but in general, I believe that Anger is more exciting to me than all of the cards I've talked about, except maybe Reckless Charge. I don't know, Reckless Charge is so-so. And special shout out to Havoc Plus, which I think is sort of the quintessential perfect addition to a middle of Act 1 Ironclad deck, because of its ability to turn a card drawn into a card played. All right, so thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed the chat. There are links to Discord and my Twitch channel and stuff like that below the video, which you can check out. and I will see you tomorrow for another Spire side chat. Bye, guys.